Hi there, warm welcome. You're watching Decoding Now, and I'm Meghna Deka. Well, will the Iran war end this weekend? We will be speaking with the world's most respected war scholar and strategist and scholar, Sir Lawrence Freedman. He's going to be joining us here on Decoding Now on if there will be a deal or no deal this weekend. But first, let's recap what really has happened in the last 24 hours to figure out if the war is ending or is it escalating. Well, a drone strike at the Kuwait international airport has triggered off a battle of narratives. Kuwaiti authorities say that an Iranian drone strike has hit the civilian airport, the same airport that also supports US military operations in the region. Well, this strike that you can see on your screens has sparked off a massive fireball, which then led to the collapse of the entire roof of the Terminal 1. Tehran, however, denies responsibility for it, claiming that the damage was caused by a misfired US Patriot interceptor. However, Washington has flatly rejected it and said the visuals are very clear that this is the doing of Iran, blaming Iran for the strike on a civilian infrastructure. So Iran has claimed that there was no attack on the passenger terminal, that the damage was done by the US missile. But US says that there was deliberate and unjustified strike by Iran on civilian infrastructure, blaming Iran for it. So very clearly, the war of words aside, the dramatic visuals which are coming in, we are going to show you these visuals, just going to send a chill down your spine. It will show just how the Kuwaiti International Airport lay bare the horrors of a drone strike. You can see there on your screen, seconds after the drone struck the terminal, there were thick plumes of smoke which can be seen engulfing the entire building as airport staff scramble for cover, passengers running to take shelter. The stunning images that you can see on your screens capture not just the scale of destruction, and remember, this is a civilian infrastructure. It is not in a war zone. This is Kuwait's international airport. This shows us the cost, the human cost of a conflict that shows very few signs of ending any time. And unfortunately, this shows how the theater of war is far beyond the three combative nations of US, Iran, and of course, Israel. But let's show you another visual on your screens, which shows fire and chaos at the airport of Kuwait after the strike. The dramatic visuals which show thick smoke engulfing the civilian terminal, as you can see panicked staff and passengers rushing for cover. Unfortunately, such is the cost of war, no one is spared. One person was killed, and that person was an Indian national. There are several others also who were injured, as you can see the extent of the damage and the injuries. Well, India understandably has now taken note of the incident. It's issued a very stern statement. India has categorically said that India condemns the attack on the Kuwait airport, gives condolences to the bereaved family of the deceased Indian, also extending all possible help to those who are injured in this horrific attack. But also, here's the important part. India has categorically said that civilian infrastructure must not be targeted, and also urges all the parties to cease any and all such attacks on civilians. But there is also rising pressure now being built on President Trump internationally as well as domestically. The war of choice, very clearly, is now not even backed by some parts of his own Republican infrastructure and party. In fact, the US House votes to end the Iran conflict, a resolution which calls for US troops pullback. Now, interestingly, there may not be a law which is passed, but the resolution at least has been passed by a 215-208 votes. Here's the interesting bit. There were 4 Republicans who voted against Trump and the war. 4 Republicans, the 4th bid to check Trump's war powers on. At the end of it, many say this may be symbolic, that there may not be an act, there is only a resolution, but at the end of it, shows the kind of pressure that Trump is under to end this war, as many are saying, a war of choice. Now, even as the US House turns up the heat on President Trump, US President is striking a very optimistic note. He is trying very clearly to say, let's get a deal. In fact, President Trump says that a deal with Iran could be reached as early as this weekend. But he's also cautioned that nothing is confirmed. Can you really trust that there's going to be a deal at a time when there is escalating tension in the war theater? India also being dragged into it? Listen in to the exact words of President Trump on how there may just be a deal. But will it really? That's the question.
The negotiation itself has gone very well, actually. Very well.
Mr. President.
It could happen. I mean, if it happens, and it might not happen, you know, who knows? But if it happens, it could happen like over the weekend.
It might happen, it might not happen. That is what President Trump says. But at the end of it all, when he was asked, what is this indiscriminate shooting, the strikes that we have seen at the time of a ceasefire, President Trump also says that that's what a ceasefire is, shooting in moderate amounts. Anyways, let's try and decode what's behind Trump's words. In fact, joining us on the show today for a perspective is Sir Lawrence David Freedman. He is the Emeritus Professor of War Studies at the King's College in London. Thank you so much, Sir Friedman, for joining us here on the show. It's a pleasure to have you here. Well, given the kind of words and the actions which simply do not match from both the sides, President Trump as well as Iran, do you see a ceasefire or else some kind of a deal, as President Trump calls it, as early as this weekend?
It's very difficult because we've been here so many times before. The ceasefire sort of holds, but there are regular breaches. There's been the question of Lebanon, where President Trump had some sort of row with Prime Minister Netanyahu, but that's led to that ceasefire being restored. So on the one hand, it's clear that President Trump wants a deal. I don't think there's any doubt that he wants a deal. His difficulty is the deal that is available is an embarrassment to him because it doesn't give him what he wanted. And this was the president spoke early in the war of unconditional surrender, the total defeat of Iran. And now we're talking about a deal that actually potentially gives Iran quite a bit. It certainly doesn't give the US the sort of nuclear settlement that they could have had possibly before the war. So the problem that the president has is he doesn't want, I don't think he wants to return to military action, but he's got himself in the position where the only deals available are clearly not victories for the US.
And is that one of the biggest problems of entering a war, given the kind of lessons we've seen from history, entering a war where the goalpost keeps changing again and again as it has been?
I think there was a fundamental error at the start, which is not a unique error, similar to the one that Putin made with Ukraine, is to believe that all the problems that you could face will be solved so long as you win the war quickly. And so the US military doctrine stresses hitting the enemy hard, fast, extensively. In this case, also taking out, with the Israelis, senior levels of the political leadership, in the belief this would leave the enemy so disoriented, discombobulated, that they would have little choice but to comply with whatever the US wanted. Unfortunately for this plan, the Iranians saw it coming. So they had replacements for everybody. They had distributed their missiles. They knew what they were going to attack and how, and they'd given local commanders the authority to do so. And they closed the Strait of Hormuz almost immediately. So none of these things were a surprise to anybody who was aware of the conflict and past scenarios involving Iran. But somehow Trump managed to convince himself that these negatives could be avoided.
Well, the past presidents of America have avoided this war repeatedly, one after the other in succession. But of course, not President Trump. But the US House, and you mentioned it, that there is growing unrest, perhaps, that President Trump is facing right now. The US House has passed a 215 to 208 resolution to end what they are calling the illegal war, though it is largely symbolic. It's unlikely to become a law. but does it somehow show the kind of fissures that President Trump is facing within his own Republican ranks?
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think as you say, it can be vetoed even if it passes in the Senate. But it's a clear indication of waning support for this war, which was never strong. I mean, even at the start, when it looked like it was going much better, there was limited support. It goes against what the president promised his supporters, that the US would not get entangled in difficult wars in the Middle East. So for that reason, I think he wants to get out of it. It's causing economic harm in the US as well as obviously in the rest of the world. So he wants, but the difficulty is that when anybody looks at the terms, and we've seen quite a lot of detail about possible deals, it's a defeat, effectively. It doesn't, the regime is in place. It's still got the ability, missiles still got the ability to attack in the region, and it controls the Strait of Hormuz. It has not been obliged to make any major concessions on its nuclear program. Excuse me. So for all these reasons, every time it looks like there could be a deal, Trump sort of wants to insert a new condition or pulls back. At some point, he's going to have to bite the bullet. At some point, he's going to have to say, there are trade-offs. He can dress it up in any way he wants and accept the political hit. But there will be a political hit.
Many people would agree with you that President Trump simply cannot find the exit. He wants out. He perhaps hasn't figured out which way that's going to be. But what if Israel is not on board? And here's the problem. Even today, Israel has attacked Lebanon shortly after a ceasefire deal between Israel and Lebanon was announced. How does Trump get Netanyahu on board, whom he apparently even thinks of as being completely crazy by his own admission?
Well, there's clearly a lot going on. I mean, one of the additional problems is Israeli elections are due by October.
Yes.
Netanyahu started this war with similar great claims about what it would achieve, and it hasn't achieved them. Hezbollah entered the war. Israel didn't attack Hezbollah as part of the end of February. Hezbollah attacked Israel, and Israel responded as Israel always responds. But a ceasefire has been agreed. And you've got a difficulty here is that Hezbollah is not really, it is party to it, but not really a party to it.
Yes.
There's a deal between Israel and the Lebanese government, who's also highly opposed to Hezbollah. So there's while Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure for apparently agreeing to allow this war, allow for a ceasefire when he hasn't fully dealt with with Hezbollah. So you've got all the complications of Israeli politics, all the complications now of US-Israeli relations, all the complications of Lebanese politics. It's a volatile mix. So I think the Iranians will probably go ahead if they think they've got a deal that suits them. And one shouldn't underestimate the pressure on Iran as well.
Yes.
I mean, its economy is in a complete mess. Its people are not able to look after themselves. Public services are in a bad way. So it's not as if Iran is completely sitting pretty on this. So I think there's pressure on them too. But clearly, if Israel and Hezbollah are just ignoring anything agreed, then Iran will not feel it can ignore that and will keep on putting them out. I don't think there's any doubt that Trump would be quite happy to haul Netanyahu in. And Netanyahu is extremely unpopular now in American politics because he's blamed in part for persuading Trump to embark on this adventure in the first place.
Absolutely. But in that case, simple question, where are we headed with this war? There are talks of this ceasefire, which could be as early as this weekend. But on the other hand, look at what's happening in the Kuwait airport. There is exchange of fire elsewhere as well. So is Trump correct in saying what he said, which is ceasefire is shooting in moderate manner? Is that the new normal in war and peace?
It's not unusual to have ceasefires which have breaches. And it suits both sides. It certainly suits Trump. for this not to be a war, a continuing war, because his claim against the war powers resolutions being passed by the House is that the ceasefire means that it's moot, that it's not relevant anymore, where it's clearly the fighting is going on. I think Iran wants to demonstrate that it's not cowed, that it has the ability to attack the targets it wants, and has shown this. And it's reminding other Gulf states that if they want this to be over, they may need to keep the pressure up on Trump, because there's limits to what they can agree directly with Iran. Although some of them are having their own conversations with Iran. My feeling is that this will end at some point, but you've got a real problem with a U.S. administration that doesn't have a grip. I mean, its negotiators are amateurs. Secretary of State is sort of absent. And, you know, somebody's got to explain that this is a really tough decision that has to be taken. There are trade-offs, there are losses, but, you know, once it's taken, you can move on.
In fact, one of the biggest problems with war is that it's not just about the combatant nations. In this Kuwait attack, which has happened at the airport, it is an Indian national who lost his life. Clearly, the theater of war has been expanding there. Do you think rising global pressure on both the nations to end it is going to work? You mentioned the Gulf nations, they themselves have been victims of it. India, sitting thousands of miles away, still gets dragged into it.
Well, a lot of the victims of the economic consequences of this are in Asia Pacific.
Absolutely.
So no, it's not contained to US and Iran by any means. So yes, I think there will be pressure, and there's quite a bit of pressure on Iran. But Iran. I mean, we don't know enough really about the politics of Tehran at the moment. There's clearly the IRGC, the hardliners, have taken control, used the opportunity to get control of the situation. The new supreme leader may be playing more of a role, but it's not clear how compass mentis he is, how well he is. So we don't know a lot.
Absolutely.
So I think the Iranians, as I say, would like a deal, especially if they can show that they've kept the great Satan at bay and they've got big concessions. But you know, that requires the Americans to give them the concessions. So and there isn't there are a number of mediators, Pakistan, Saudis, Chinese possibly, but as yet they haven't been able to finalize it. I say the logic is that it'll have to happen, but we've been saying that for 2 months now.
Yes, everyone's been thinking that perhaps this week there have been so many back and forth. But since you touched upon the larger theater of war, the economic fallout of that as well, what do you predict whenever it does end? What will the world after the Iran war look like? China, is that more palatable now for the US than ever before? What are your projections for India?
Well, I think first it's undermined US prestige and power. This wasn't a necessary war. It was started on, as we discussed earlier, on the basis of assumptions that turned out to be false. So it's weakened America. I think the consequences in the Gulf are quite profound.
Yes.
Gulf states have found themselves with a security situation that is far more parlous than they anticipated. The US has not been able to get them out of it, has been of limited use. So all the bets that were made on the Trump administration last year turned out not to be such good bets. After all, remember, Qatar, the UAE, Saudis put a lot of effort into Trump. They saw him as a natural ally. So I think that is something that's going to have to be worked through. But I don't think we'll go back to the position where the US was the major power. Now, you know, nobody else has come in. Russians can't do very much.
The Chinese?
The Chinese can, but they've taken a rather, I mean, they've done their own sort of understandings with Tehran.
True.
But the Chinese do not like to play the big power role in the way that the US is in the past. They don't sort of come in and do sort of excuse me.
No problem.
Sorry. And do these sort of big, high-profile mediation efforts and so on. It's just not the Chinese way. So they may be having conversations in the background, but they're not coming in. And they're not alternatives to the US in terms of support. And also, of course, the Gulf states are split amongst themselves. The UAE has been more with Israel and the US. The Saudis less happy. And of course, the whole question of Israel is, one point last week, Trump was saying that one part of the settlement should be everybody joins the Abraham Accords, which is clearly not going to happen at the moment.
That certainly will not be palatable for a lot of the nations.
No, so everything's in flux, I would say.
So everything is in a flux, but there is a little glimmer of hope, because there are words coming in that it's mild shooting, moderate shooting during a ceasefire. That's okay, that there may just be a deal instead of a no deal this weekend. We just had an interesting conversation with Sir Freedman, and thank you so much for putting all of this into perspective for us, not just what can be expected, and also what we are hoping would be the best way out to find the exit out of a war. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. With that, we wrap up Decoding Now.